Good morning.
Good morning, Ronald. As raised yesterday, today's proceeding will largely concern inviting relatives of the deceased to come forward and read family statements.
Yes. But
before I do so, firstly, can I attend to tendering some documents that are outstanding? And I'm going to, with Your Honour's leave, identify this document as a group of documents.
yes.
First of all, a tender MFI-A, which is a two-page extract from the logbook of Mary Van Put. Tender MFI-B, which is a typed statement of Virginia Clark. Both of those documents are with the court. I then tender the following documents. New South Wales health policies regarding advanced care directives, and in particular New South Wales health policy in place at the time of the outbreak, titled End of Life Care and Decision Making. And secondly, New South Wales health policy in place at the time of the outbreak, titled Advanced Care Directives. I next tender a New South Wales health booklet titled Making an Advanced Care Directive. I tender New South Wales Health Standard Observation Chart. Next, letter from the Crown Solicitor's Office to the Department of Communities and Justice detailing assumptions in Professor Bennett's letter of instruction. That letter is dated 8 August 2022. I next tender the ASID, standing for Australasian Society for Infectious Diseases Limited, guidelines that were referred to in Dr. Brownlee's evidence and during the evidence of the conclave. I tender the curriculum vitae bundle of Anglicare board members who had medical qualifications as at April 2020. I tender the complete transcript of the family webinar that was conducted on 23 April 2020. I tender the advanced care plan record currently used in Anglicare residential aged care facilities. I tender a document entitled COVID-19 in a Nursing Home, a Case Study and Lessons Learnt, which is an article by Professor Lynn Gilbert dealing with the Dorothy Henderson Lodge outbreak. I tender the COVID Task Force Guideline for 16 April 2020. And finally, I tender the New South Wales Health Person Protective Equipment Report, which was tendered in the Royal Commission, but does not appear to have been included in the brief of evidence. I tender those documents.
Thank you. All of the legal representatives have had an opportunity to consider those documents, is that right?
That's my understanding.
All right. I might then just turn to each of the legal representatives and ask globally whether there is any objection to the tender of any of those documents that have been identified. Ms. Davis?
Ms. Clark, I am attending in person.
Thank you.
No objections to the documents.
All right, thank you very much. Mr. Palfrey, do you have any objection to the tender of any of the documents that have been identified?
No, Your Honour.
Thank you. Ms. Furness, any objection?
No, thank you, Your Honour.
Thank you. And Ms. Richardson, any objection?
No, Your Honour.
Thank you. Mr. Fordham, any objection?
There's no objection. We would just like the opportunity to check the transcript that's been tendered.
Of the webinar? I see. All right.
And if there's an issue, we'll raise it with counsel assisting.
All right, very well. Thank you. In that case then, let me just assign exhibit numbers to each of the documents. Former MFI-A, which is the logbook, will be exhibit 7. Former MFI-B, which is Ms. Clark's statement, will be exhibit 8. The New South Wales Health directive documents in relation to end-of-life decision-making and advanced care directives will collectively be Exhibit 9. The additional New South Wales Health document regarding the making of advanced care directives will be Exhibit 10. The standard adult general observation chart from New South Wales Health will be Exhibit 11. The letter from the Crown Solicitor's Office dated the 8th of August this year regarding Professor Bennett's letter of instruction will be Exhibit 12. The ACID guidelines will be Exhibit 13. The curriculum vitae bundle of some of the board members of Anglicare will be Exhibit 14. I will provisionally admit the transcript of the family webinar of the 23rd of April 2020 as Exhibit 15. But Mr. Fordham, if there's an indication that there's no objection to that admission, that it will be confirmed as Exhibit 15.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Thank you. The advanced care planning record currently used by Anglicare in residential aged care facilities will be Exhibit 16. Professor Gilbert's article regarding Dorothy Henderson Lodge will be Exhibit 17. The COVID Task Force guidelines of 16 April 2020 will be Exhibit 18. And lastly, the New South Wales Health Person Protective Report tendered in the Royal Commission will be Exhibit 19.
Thank you, Your Honour.
Thank you.
The documents having been tendered, it's now now falls to the family statements to be read.
Yes.
And in that respect, I first invite Mary Van Putt and Gavin Taylor to come forward and read their statements in respect of Barry G. Hahn.
Thank you. Thank you. Whenever you're ready.
Good morning. Firstly, we would like to thank you, Your Honour, for conducting this inquest and giving a voice to the 19 lives that were tragically lost at Newmarch House. We would also like to extend our appreciation to the council assisting team, including Mr. Buchan, Ms. Harris, Ms. Matwa, Mr. Chi and Ms. McKinley. And further extend our thanks to Detective Inspector Steve Peroni and his team from the Penrith Police. We are very grateful for your support and your guidance through this difficult and emotional time. Dad loved living at Newmarch House. The staff were very friendly and the grounds were well kept and the tucker was good, according to Dad. During his time there, we always felt that the nursing staff took great care of him. We want to acknowledge that the extremely trying and scary conditions of the staff were experienced all the time of the outbreak of Newmarch House. The long hours and the time spent away from their families in what can only be described as unprecedented circumstances would have been very challenging, and we do appreciate that they had given their time to look after our loved ones in such an extreme condition. We are still heartbroken that our dad and pa would have surely felt that we had deserted him, not having seen or hugged us for well over a month, as we didn't know that window visits were an option. His hearing aids weren't put in by staff and he couldn't lip read with all the PPE that nurses would have had to be wearing, which would have left him feeling very confused, lonely and frustrated. To not know what was going on in this sort of situation would have been so frightening for him. To know that his final weeks and days would have been spent in a state of isolation, confusion, and without his family by his side to comfort him, is something that will sit with our family for long after the outcome of this inquest. Dad deserved better. We hope that any recommendations that arise from this inquest will ensure that other families will not have to experience this. Our dad, Barry Jahan, was Barry Lyle Jahan. He was born in 1926, along with Winnie the Pooh, Jack Brabham and Dame Joan Sutherland, all of whom he was a big fan. The first electric train service from Central to Oakley began, and so did Dad's love affair with trains. He would grow up to be a signalman for New South Wales Railways, a job he proudly held for 43 years. He was born in Chatswood on 29th of September in 1926, the eldest of three children to Kathleen Mary and Norman Brooke Jahan. He, along with his brother, David, and his sister Ailsa, lived in Northbridge and had a fun, carefree and adventurous childhood. He loved to swim at Balmoral, play on the beach and go bushwalking. He remembered going to the opening of the Sydney Harbour Bridge with his grandfather and brother. He married Mum on the 27th of June 1959, and with the arrival of my sister Kate and I, our family was complete. Mum was plagued with ill health during our younger years, but Dad was always there to keep the household running smoothly. Mum and Dad were both devout Catholics and very active in their church. They lived what they believed in, kindness and helping of others, always trying to help someone less fortunate. Dad's favourite saying was, "Do unto others," a motto I think he lived up to well and truly. He was known amongst family and friends as Mr. Fix-It. He could fix just about anything, and if he didn't know how to, he'd find out. Always the handyman, whether it be painting our houses, working on a new garden, fixing everybody's cars or toasters, making toys for his grandchildren, or fixing grandchildren's toys over and over for the favourite ones they used so often. He would always be happy to lend a helping hand. Much to our horror, he was still servicing his own car up on the ramps at home early into his 80s. The original upcycler, Dad could turn anything old into something new and useful, so he never threw anything out. It made his garage the ultimate place for the grandkids to play. They'd always find something new in there to spark their imaginations, or could spend hours playing hide and seek amongst all his tools and equipment. A shift worker all his life, he was always up for a chat, making many lifelong friends during his time on relieving staff. He was an avid reader and loved his Reader's Digest immensely. What a collection he had. Dad loved his photography and researching our family tree, both passions he passed down to me. Music featured big time in Dad's life. A signalman working alone for a whole 8-hour shifts, his classic music kept him company. Travel or being on or near the water were extra special for him. Together, both Mum and Dad saw most of Australia and New Zealand. Dad travelled the world after he retired in 1986, something Mum was unable to do due to ill health. After retiring in 1986, Dad was a volunteer bus driver with Bankstown Community Transport for about 10 years. He joked that he enjoyed driving the oldies around, even though he wasn't far off their ages. He also loved his golf, which he played once or twice a week at East Hill Seniors. He also enjoyed his walks with the Diabetic Walking Club each month. Sometimes, if the weather was good, they would meet more often. Dad had a love of technology. We are so grateful to have hundreds of hours of videos that he recorded as our families grew. He always captured the important family occasions such as birthdays, Christmases, family reunions, and sometimes a lot of the floor when he forgot to turn it off. He was so amazed that the first time he saw an iPhone and that he could record and store all your photos and videos in something so small and compact. He purchased his first computer in 1997 and enjoyed being able to use it to record his family history and store many, many photos. He also loved playing solitaire, and we would often find him in his room at Newmarch House, engrossed in a game of solitaire reviewing old photos. Despite his enthusiasm for technology, he would need help when he got himself into trouble, making copies of everything and having duplicate folders everywhere. Luckily, his son-in-law John was usually on hand to get him out of his mess. Dad suffered a great loss when Mum passed away in 2005. He was adamant he wanted to stay in his own home, but loneliness set in as many of his friends and golfing mates were passing away. He eventually came to live with us to be closer to the family in 2007, where he happily stayed for the next 10 years. During this time, all of my adult children and their pets returned to the family home to live at one point or another. All of the kids have expressed how grateful they are to have had this time with Dad and how special it was to spend so much quality time together. Dad was an animal lover and in particular formed a very strong bond with my daughter's dog Forrest while they lived with us for a period of 15 months. Most days you would find Dad and Forrest sitting outside reading the paper in the sun together for hours at a time. Dad moved into Newmarch house in 2018. Sadly, in his later years, dementia diminished his recent memories, but boy, he could tell a story or two of his childhood. Despite having written down a lot of his stories and memories earlier, he could still recall these stories fondly and in great detail. Dad would often recite nursery rhymes and always had a funny saying for any questions. Things is crook in Tallarook, but it can't say worse in Musselbrook. Or lines from Hey Diddle Diddle or The Man from Snowy River were often given as responses to generic questions. We realise now that he was testing his memory each time. We have good memories of taking Dad out once he moved into Newmarch House. He did love the bus trips he got to do there. As a child, he used to sail boats in Middle Harbour, so on a day out, being near the water with fish and chips, Dad was happy as Larry. A good day out for Dad was travelling the countryside, which we did often. He loved walking, and finishing any day out with an ice cream made his day complete. His favourite thing, though, was the family visits he received while at Newmarch House. He absolutely loved spending time with his 5 grandchildren, 4 great-grandchildren, and Forrest whenever they came to visit. It took him back to his own childhood when playing games and playing hide and seek was a great way to spend a day. Sadly, 3 more great-grandchildren have arrived since he passed, and another is on the way next week. It breaks our heart that they won't get to meet the man who would lovingly hold them and played with them and created the same fond memories that we all have with him. His favourite game to play with visitors was dominoes. He could play for hours and somehow it was always his turn and he always won. His 2 eldest great-grandchildren even when asked for dominoes for their birthdays so they could practice to play with Pa. When family from France had visited from overseas, language was a bit of a barrier, but a game of dominoes always helped to break the ice for Dad. I remember playing our last game of dominoes the day lockdown started. Trying to explain to Dad about the reason that the world was locking down was challenging. How do you explain something that is still so new and ever evolving? Telling him the Olympics had been cancelled resulted in, oh dear. But explaining to him that the situation was so serious that his beloved Royal Easter Show was cancelled made him exclaim, wow, it must be bad. That he understood. He'd only missed a handful of Easter shows in his 93 years. It was a family tradition that started with his grandfather and while myself and his grandchildren continued with him. He loved it when country came to the city each year. Dad was a man from good, strong genes. His father was 88 years old when he passed away, and Dad's 99-year-old cousin passed soon after he did in 2020. His 90-year-old sister, Elsa, still resides in aged care at Rudy Hill. Our dad, Barry, was 93 years and 7 months when he passed. He still had a lot of life left in him, a lot more ice cream to eat, and a lot more memories to be made. So to our dad and our pa, all that's left to say now is cheery bye or TTFN, which is ta-ta for now. We love you and we miss you dearly. Thank you.
Ms. Van Putt, Mr. Taylor, thank you very much for sharing those words with us all. I would like to say something collectively to all the family members, but we'll do so once everyone has read or given their family statements. Thank you.
I next invite Mark and Sarah G to come forward to read their statements in respect of David G.
Good morning, and thank you for this opportunity. Wanted to say first, we do not give permission for the media to use our statements or photos. I love my dad, David G. I'm his third and youngest son. He called me monkey a lot as I grew up, which I didn't like at all, but it shows his sense of fun and his sense of humour and his desire to connect. Dad did his best with what he had. He overcame so many challenges to build a life and a family. I've always enjoyed sharing the fascinating elements of Dad's childhood. He was born in Aruba, just off the coast of Venezuela, a little island, going to boarding school in Jamaica and moving back to Wales in the UK and staying with his brother in a gypsy caravan outside their house. Dad mentioned Wales whenever he could, and that may have helped others to understand why it could be so hard to understand his accent. He loved the idea of returning to Wales, or of us kids going to Wales. Dad met Mum in hospital. He was a patient and she was a nurse. Dad would say that he charmed her, and I guess he did. They married, built a home and a family in Cambridge Park, and lived there for over 40 years. Mum and Dad were loyal and long-term members of Penrith Baptist Church and always tried to live out their faith in Jesus in a real way that blessed others. Many of my own favourite memories from my childhood involve playing with litters of collie pups and long summer holidays camping at the coast. Mum and Dad have left behind 3 sons and 3 daughters-in-law and 10 grandchildren whom they absolutely adored. And they only just missed the arrival of their first great-grandchild. They were just a few months short of their 50th wedding anniversary when Mum passed away after a battle with cancer on May the 2nd, 2019. Mum was hoping to get well enough to move into Newmarch before she died. Dad was heartbroken to lose Mum, and he became very unwell and unable to live on his own. We were glad that he was able to move into Newmarch within weeks of Mum's passing. Living in the Blaxland wing at Newmarch, Dad seemed to find peace. He missed Mum terribly, but his health became more stable. He was still affected by many conditions and ailments and affected daily by dementia. For the most part, Dad had a very relaxing year, and as a family, we got used to visiting him in his room or while he was eating a meal with new friends in the dining room. He watched DVDs or the news almost constantly in his room and would tell any staff he could how much he wanted to be with Mum and to go back to Wales. In Dad's last days, there was a lot of distress and confusion and anger for Dad and for us as his family. We were able to be with Mum as she passed a year before, but now Dad was alone for most of each day and separated from his family and those who knew him, relying on staff for care and relying on screens to see us and hear us. We watched this horrible virus quite quickly destroy his body. It broke our hearts to see Dad suffer and not be able to be close to him. As his sons, we had difficult decisions to make about the risk posed to our health and to our families in terms of taking the chance to see Dad and say goodbye in person. I was able to go in to say goodbye to Dad with the help of a very kind RN, very late during the night, just a couple of days before Dad died. I stood at the end of his bed. I said all the names of the family and loved ones, telling him of his family and loved ones, telling him how each of us loved him and were praying for him. On Tuesday evening, the 28th of April, Dad passed away. He died alone in a dark room. As a family, we carry sadness about the way Dad died, but we couldn't be there. I like to picture, as I believe what Dad did about heaven and resurrection, that Dad woke up in a very well-lit place, greeted by Mum and others who know him and love him, without ailments, without distress, without pain, and without grief. And so we carry also this hope in Jesus that the death of our bodies is not the end, and we look forward to being reunited in eternity. Thank you for this opportunity to share about Dad.
My name's Sarah. I'm David's daughter-in-law. David and Dawn were home. They were the place to go home to. Home was the place where we belonged, found comfort and were known. When we came home, David would give comfort by cooking piles of Grandpa's choc chip cookies or the perfect buttery garlic baked potatoes. As a daughter-in-law, I found belonging by having someone in David that I could banter with, and we had fun paying out on each other. David loved his grandkids and knew all about what they liked and didn't like. Always saying how proud he was of his sons and telling all he knew stories of his grandchildren and paying out on his daughters-in-law. Home was where we were known and cared for. Home was where we could all say what we thought. David was a man of Christian faith with a strong justice streak. According to his faith, he believed that we should speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. David could often be heard when watching the news saying, "If I were the police." He was passionate about things being made right in the world. To David, Dawn was home. And when she passed away, he just wanted to be with her. He didn't want to die. He wanted to go home to her. He didn't feel at home without her. And so, as often happens as we grow older, the parent becomes the child and the child becomes the parent. Just weeks before Dawn passed away, David became gravely ill after having a stroke. And so we needed to find a new home for David, where he would be known, where he would have comfort, where he could be looked after. We found a home for him, where he was already known by some staff, where he could be cooked for and have his own space, and where he could have the 24/7 care that he needed, and where his children and grandchildren, friends and church friends were all just around the corner to visit, to take care of him and to laugh with him. And after a time, it did become home to David. It was in this new home that we, his family, in partnership, took care of him. Perhaps that is why we are also heartbroken and traumatized. The first few weeks of the home being shut down was for David's safety. But when COVID hit the home, the isolation and separation became for our protection, a nation's protection. Our vulnerable loved ones had unwillingly become a shield for us. They sacrificed their home and their comfort, their belonging, their safety, and the love from family that they so desperately needed in their last, most vulnerable days for us. Whether they wanted to or understood it or not. We only wanted to give them love, care, comfort, to know them, to give them a sense of home and love, just like they had done for us. I miss that I didn't get to hold his hand, to stroke his face, to comfort him and reassure him. I grieve for David, that he wasn't able to be surrounded by his family in his last hours. Over a screen, I saw nurses with gloved hands stroke his face, offer soothing words of comfort and pray for him. They were strangers to David, but still loved him on behalf of us and cried tears over the phone when they told us of his passing. In our contact with the home, there was a tangible feeling of distress, fear and confusion. Yet there is no doubt in our minds that each nurse, doctor, staff member gave their all in the most distressing and confusing of circumstances. However, we never knew if David was cared for consistently with basic healthcare and mental health care needs in his time of having COVID. For example, was he hydrated? Was his CPAP machine given to him for his sleep apnea? Both Mark and I have been traumatised by the events that happened around David's death and have sought counselling. The last time I saw David was just before the Newmarch lockdown. The news was on the TV. Italy and COVID in nursing homes, I believe, and he was visibly distressed. With great concern, knowing that what he was seeing was what I was seeing and worried about, I asked him what was upsetting him. He said tearily, the way they are treating people. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. G.
I now ask Mary Watson to come forward and speak about Alice Bacon.
I don't know how I'm going to get through this. With a problem chair. Yep. Calm. Yep. Okay. Firstly, I would like to thank Your Honour for allowing this inquest to go ahead by rejecting the submission from Anglicare to dismiss it. The gratitude that our family felt at that decision was a relief. I'm grateful that we were able to express the emotional turmoil and trauma that we felt at losing our mum in such tragic and don't put it there. In such tragic and premature circumstances. Throughout the inquest, we have heard so much evidence suggesting that most of the residents in Newmarch were frail, suffering from dementia or diabetes. Our mum did not fall into this category. She was ambulant, she was able to communicate, she was independent in facility, she was an extremely proud Irish loyalist woman. She was very much, her faith was very strong to her. She participated in church, Bible studies. She was extremely helpful inside Newmarch. She took it upon herself to look after many residents, sharing with their families when she was worried about them. She set the dining room table up. She was the lolly queen, apparently. All the children in Lawson knew to go to Nanny Alice to get lollies. Was her way of drawing them all in. I think most people in Newmarch had a coat hanger that she knit, and yeah, she
had a lot. She was very much a part of the Newmarch family. She had underlying medical conditions, but that didn't stop her from enjoying life. She loved spending time with her family. She had grandchildren, she had great-grandchildren. She still had a lot to give. She had babies on the way, a wedding that was being prepared. She was still ready to move forward. We were told that it was too upsetting for her to be moved due to, it was better that she stayed in Newmarch where she had familiar surroundings. But what eventuated was that she ended up being cared for by strangers through no fault of anybody's. And she ended up being moved to her friend's room who had just recently died. This stressed her so much. We had to try and comfort Mum from a distance while she was confined in Newmarch. She was on the phone to us, crying, telling us that she'd not had her medication, food, no clean clothes. She was lonely or not knowing what was happening to her friends inside Newmarch. To say that this was disturbing and deeply distressing is an understatement. We had no criticism towards the many staff of all disciplines who showed up at Newmarch and did the best they could under what we know were very difficult and stressful conditions. We clapped when they drove down the driveway. If we were walking around the facility for a window visit, we thanked every single one of them. We were assured that hospital in the home would provide Mum with all the care that she required, just like she was in hospital. Our family feel misled, and the guilt I carry for this model still haunts me today. We accepted that they would be provided with the care that they needed. We feel robbed of the time we still had with Mum. We weren't naive as to her age. She was 93. But we had no reason to believe that she was leaving us anytime soon, and certainly not the way she did. I don't understand how we locked away our most vulnerable to keep them safe. That's what we were told. But then when they needed medical intervention, they were not seen as appropriate candidates for hospital care, as they pose so great a threat to the wider community because of the risk of transmission. It was hard. It has been, as you know, I've been here every day, and it's been heart-wrenching to hear the evidence that keeping COVID contained in Newmarch was a good outcome. Also was the evidence given that when a staff member left after her long shift, she stated she could hear residents calling out for help through their closed doors. We have listened to expert witnesses saying that there may have been a different outcome for Mum if she was transferred for hospital for care. We also heard that if the infection control measures were implemented more effectively, she probably wouldn't have caught the virus at all. We are heartbroken by this information. We did go to the media because we were so desperate to get care inside of Newmarch, and I believe with that activism by my sister and I and some other families that we did get some improvements. Ultimately, my family will despair at having believed that Mum would be receiving the best care possible. I feel responsible for this, allowing this to happen, and not insisting that she was taken to hospital. I got to go inside to see my mum 3 times. The last interaction that I had with her was on the 16th of May when she begged us to get her out. We weren't able to do that. She threw my hand into the way and said, "Get." That's the last thing she said to me. Oops, sorry. She passed away on the 19th, almost 3 days later, alone and behind a closed door. I feel that Mum thought we let her down, despite our best efforts, but ultimately Mum and ourselves and all the residents of Newmarch were let down by everyone who was involved in managing the outbreak at Newmarch House, and I include everyone in that. I no longer live close to Newmarch. I have taken early retirement and moved interstate. My sister Alison, who had worked at Newmarch, also retired early and has moved away. And this is a direct result of the residual trauma and anguish that we suffered during the COVID outbreak at Newmarch. By speaking today and telling of our sorrow, it's our hope that no other family will suffer the way we did. This was only our experience. There are 18 others. Finally, I would like to express our deepest appreciation to the coroner, his senior counsel, and their team for their tireless work that they have performed in ensuring that all aspects of this COVID outbreak at Newmarch House have been examined. We also would like to thank Steve Peroni and his team for diligently following through. And again, thank you for this opportunity to speak today, as hard as it's been.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson.
Libby Smith has prepared a written statement in respect of Victor Stone, and I'll ask my colleague, Mr. Harris, to read that statement.
Your Honour, Ms Smith writes this statement about her brother, Victor, and she says this: Victor was a quiet and shy person, full of life, and he was a funny person. He didn't want other people knowing his business. Victor was a great person. He loved his fishing and walking and going to the TAB and his fish and chips from the shop. Victor used to love working on his car, that's a Cortina, years ago. He was so protective of it. Victor would do anything for anybody if he could. Libby, Helen and Cheryl were not around for years because of other family problems. But Libby says, after our mum was taken to live with our sister Gay, Victor only had us two from that time until his passing. We should have had a lot of years left with him still, but we've lost all those years with him now.
Thank you for reading that, Mr. Harris.
Can I now invite Susan O'Neill to come forward and read the statement that she has prepared in relation to Ray Jennings.
Ray Jennings, our dad, was the first resident of Newmarch House to pass away in the COVID outbreak of 2020. He spent his whole life looking after his family, and it saddens us deeply that we were not able to be there to look after him in his final days. But this is not our burden alone. It is shared by other families who also lost their loved ones during that terrible time. It is true that our family was spared much of the anguish and distress that others experienced as the outbreak took hold. So to the families of the other residents who passed away, we want to say that we stand with you and we share in your grief. Through the inquest, we have learnt of the compassion, bravery and dedication of so many people involved with Newmarch, who did their absolute best in the most difficult and distressing of circumstances. People like Emma Cardwell, who we learned was with Dad when he died, when we couldn't be. Listening to their evidence gave us a much clearer picture of the conditions under which they worked. We would have loved to thank them all personally, but even if we could, no amount of thanks would ever be enough. We also wish to thank all those involved in bringing this inquest together and all those who participated so that the families could get the answers they deserve. The Newmarch outbreak experience has had a deep and lasting impact on all those involved. But we are further distressed by the latest statistics on COVID deaths in aged care. These make it all the more crucial that lessons are learned from what happened at Newmarch and that they are heeded and implemented. Finally, it saddens us that the name of Newmarch House has become associated with death and despair. It is our sincere hope that one day it will regain its good name and the wonderful reputation it once enjoyed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms O'Neill.
Helen Kerrigan has prepared the following statement in respect of her mother, Olive Grego. At the time, it was devastating finding out that Mum had contracted COVID. I knew Mum would not survive. Her health was failing and she had suffered from breathing problems for a while. I came to terms with the fact that we were going to lose Mum. My father did not. I had been slowly trying to prepare Dad for Mum's passing. Being told my mum's oxygen levels were good, and then finding out that the doctor was reading me out another patient's medical records was devastating. It was a shocking experience and one I'll never forget. She died the next day. I will always be upset that the doctor caring for my mum didn't even know who she was. I know Anglicare were not prepared for the pandemic, but neither was the health system or the whole aged care system. Unfortunately, Newmarch House was the first to be impacted. I've come to terms with what happened, and so has my family. Knowing Mum was being cared for by nurses from Nepean Hospital ICU in Newmarch gave me a lot of comfort. One of my brothers believes that if Mum had been taken to hospital, she wouldn't have suffered as long as she did. He is still angry about that. Being able to talk to Mum on WhatsApp and being able to say our goodbyes to Mum was a great comfort at the time. My father is in a nursing home now. His health declined rapidly after my mum passed away. He was very fit prior. He played golf, went dancing, drove his car, mowed his lawn, and lived independently. Mum's passing has had a devastating impact. It was very stressful losing Mum the way we did, and I believe it was compounded by the misinformation we were given. Dad lost all faith in the doctors and what we had been told. He became very depressed. He couldn't bear to watch the news. It was a constant reminder. He's very frail now. Staff at his Anglicare home are taking very good care of him. I was satisfied with the daily phone calls and emails which kept us informed about Mum until the doctor rang and read us the wrong information. I know the staff at Newmarch House took good care of my mum prior to the COVID outbreak. I worry about the impact it has had on the staff's mental health. They deserved much better support. Can I next invite Nicole Fay to read her statement in respect of Anne Fay.
Okay. First of all, Your Honour, we'd like to take this opportunity to thank you for pushing forward with this inquest. It has been incredibly important to our family, but also for the 19 lives that were lost. And we do appreciate you pushing forward despite applications to dismiss. Bear with me, it's been a big week. The sudden and traumatic death of our beloved mother, sister, grandmother, friend, and family matriarch, Anne Fay, is something we as a family are yet to process. At just 76, she was bright, witty, hilarious, loud, feisty, full of life, and an absolute advocate and voice for her fellow residents at Newmarch. As a proud Liverpudlian from England, she had a heart of gold. She was generous and fun-loving by nature. To all of her friends and the people that she touched, they were showered with her warmth and radiant positivity. As both a Liverpudlian and a 10-pound pom, you really couldn't find someone more down-to-earth and tough, yet as warm and loving as our Anne. One of the most important things we would like our mum, our nan, my nanpy, and Auntie Anne, as she was known, to be remembered for was the incredible impact that she brought to her fellow residents in the Blacksland wing at Newmarch. After moving into Newmarch, because she didn't want to live with us a lot, she purely moved into Newmarch House for social reasons and to have her own space in an environment where she could truly do it all in her very own home. She adored Newmarch, and so did we. The friendships she developed while at Newmarch were some of her most cherished. Nan was very much the confidant for them, the only one they went to for advice, the one who would speak up for the others who couldn't do so very well themselves, the one to welcome everyone to that dinner table every evening and lend a shoulder to cry on for those who were struggling. She would share her lollies and chocolates from the vending machine and would have possibly funded that vending machine all herself. You could very much say that our Anne and my Nan was the queen bee, the youngster, the snazziest nanny around, which is just another reason our loss has been so difficult to swallow. She used to play games with the other residents, and a lot of the time, some of them didn't quite get what she was doing or what she was saying, but she used to make them smile and make them laugh, and that was the highlight of my Nan's day, making them happy and giving them a bit of positivity in every single day. She was always thinking of others and there for everyone. In those last few weeks, it pained her to be isolated from those other residents who she looked after and who needed her. One of her last remarks to us over the phone, which is something we as a family will never, ever be able to erase from our memory, is, quote, "All day I long for that door to open and to see a face, any face. I just want to see a face." That is something that is extremely hard to forget, and something that I, as well as my mum and dad, think about every goddamn day. At just 76, Anne was soon to see her grandson, my brother, get married to the love of his life, whom she very much adored as well. She was also soon, She was also soon to meet her granddaughter's first baby, William, who was to be named after her husband of 50 odd years. She will now never get to see so many of life's wonderful milestones that her very close-knit family of 5 had coming up for her to enjoy. After all, she was just 76. She was the happiest, most content she had been since the passing of her husband William in 2008. Nan was thriving. She really was. I would regularly take her out for coffee and eggs Benny with lots of hollandaise sauce most weekends. She was out and about all the time. And when she wasn't out and about with us, she was partying it up in Newmarch. She was making the other residents feel like they had something to get up for if they didn't have family visiting. She brought residents who had not left their rooms for months and years out of their shells, back socialising because Nan was that shining light for them. She had finally found her new home, her way, after Grandad had died. Anne's only sister, Kathy, who lives overseas, has been left absolutely distraught, disturbed, and immensely pained after not being able to say goodbye to her only little sister. Each time Auntie Kathy calls us, she cries. Any loss for any human being is grueling. However, the loss of someone who had so much more to see, do, and give, who was happy, content, and pretty healthy, and full of life, who through no fault of their own, who had the inability to say goodbye or for us to visit her in her final days. It was traumatic. No words quite describe what happened to us, what happened to the other families, but more importantly, what happened to Anne. Not only did we as a family suffer throughout this traumatic event, the person who suffered the most was our beautiful Anne and my beautiful Nan. Her final weeks were agonisingly lonely, wondering what was happening to her dear friends, wondering when she could next see her family and see us, with no one able to provide her with any answers. Nothing. We cannot imagine how she must have felt. The anger and hurt we feel as a family for what happened will never, ever subside. We just wish we could have said goodbye, and that she spent her last time on earth here with us. The most beautiful woman we've ever known. She was ours. And Faye, everyone misses you. You will never, ever be forgotten. The Faye family. Thank you. I might take this too. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Fay.
Patricia Jensen has prepared some words about Maria James, and I will ask those to be read by my colleague, Ms. Martois. Thank you.
Yes, Your Honour, these are the words of Patricia Jensen in relation to Maria James. I don't know if this statement will express enough the ongoing grief, loss I still feel about my beautiful, loving mother. Words really cannot express how I continue to painfully mourn her loss. I feel she was taken away too soon and too young. The emotional, psychological, physical impact regarding my mother's premature death on the 23rd of April 2020 at Newmarch House due to COVID-19 continues to impact my health and well-being. I continue to have feelings of guilt, frustration, anxiety, stress, and feelings of helplessness because of how she died, and I feel I couldn't help her or visit her in Newmarch House. When I think of her and how she died, I sometimes cannot sleep. The day I watched my mother being transferred on a stretcher into the back of an ambulance from Nepean Hospital, bound for Newmarch House on the 31st of March 2020, I had a bad gut feeling. I felt or sensed that I was not going to see my mother again. I never got to see my mother in Newmarch House, and I never got to say goodbye to her face to face, and neither did any other family member get to see her or say goodbye. My mother was also my best friend. I miss her laughter, her sense of humour, and her compassion and her companionship. My mother was a nurse, and so am I, so we could talk about nursing and discuss her nursing days and her being a midwife. I really miss our talks. Life without her feels very empty. My mother looked forward to being present when my daughter got married, and she was looking forward to being a great-grandmother. I'm very sad that my mother missed seeing my daughters Rebecca get married on the 14th of April 2022, and that she will also miss seeing my younger daughter, Anneli, get married on the 24th of March 2023. I miss my mother attending our family functions, and especially at Christmas time. My mother's presence at her local church is missed very much. She was a valued member of her congregation. My mother was deprived of getting the last rites from her parish priest before she died, and also she was unable to have a Catholic funeral, Mass, like she wished due to COVID-19. As a result of COVID-19 restrictions, many family members and close friends were unable to attend the gravesite funeral service because only 10 people were allowed to attend at the time. This was very distressing to family and friends that could not attend. Our families collectively and individually continue to mourn the loss of our mother, She will be forever in our family's hearts and minds. She is now with our Lord.
Thank you, Ms. Marshall.
Can I finally invite Virginia Clark to read some words about Ron Farrell?
I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank Your Honour and thank everybody here that has done a marvellous job, I think, looking at all the evidence and so forth for the inquest. So thank you very much for your time and so forth. I'd like to talk a bit about my dad, Ronald Kirby Farrell. He was born on the 28th of May 1925 at Roseville. Sorry. Sorry.
That's all right. He attended the Roseville School and was a choir boy at the local church. He commenced work at Winchcombe Castle at the age of 16, where he spent most of his working life. In 1942, at the age of 18, he joined the Royal Australian Air Force and he served in Cairns on the Catalina flying boats. In 1946, after 4 years of service, he returned to Winchcombe's and became an auctioneer and stock and stud manager. At various stages of his career, he was transferred to Newcastle, Orange and then Forbes, where many people still have fond memories of Dad. Dad's handshake was as good as any written contract because of his integrity. He was much respected within the rural community. Dad earned the respect and trust of all his colleagues and clients he ever worked with. He was a man known by many and respected by all. Even after 30 years of retirement, people still remembered him, and a full-page obituary was written in the Landit newspaper. He eventually ended up in Sydney at St Mary's on 5 acres. Dad married Mum in 1947. He always fondly called her Margot. They had 7 children, 5 daughters, Julie, Christine, Frances, Virginia and Jennifer, and 2 sons, Mark and Grant. Dad was very proud of his 7 children. Mum and Dad first set up house in Forestville, where they built their first home whilst living in the garage from a packing case. Dad built the house out of fibre and materials he could salvage. He quarried flagstone from the local creek. Dad and his brother Uncle Gordon started the first volunteer bushfire brigade at Forestville. Dad served many years as the captain. The brigade has continued till this day, and Dad was honoured by the fire service at Davidson, where they celebrate their 70th anniversary. His name is on top of the honour roll as the first captain, a fact that he was very proud of. As his children married and the family grew, St Mary's became a haven for all. Mum and Dad formed many friendships over their time at St Mary's. He was involved in the Neighbourhood Watch, and he helped start the first St Mary's Progress Club. As the many grandchildren came along, we always got together at Christmas. It was a very special time with presents cascading from the tree and Dad with the appropriate Santa hat handing out the many presents to everyone. The entire family have wonderful memories of these Christmases. It was a special time, and anyone who had no one to celebrate with were always made welcome. Mum and Dad moved to Mulgoa to a smaller house. The grandkids loved going to Mulgoa as Mum and Dad had a swimming pool. There was nothing better than spending a hot summer's day with Grandpa in the pool, making whirlpools. Afterwards, there was always the customary sausage sizzle on Dad's homemade barbecue. After Mum passed away, Dad sold up and moved into Penrith. He missed his wife and wanted to be closer to the family. Dad loved his footy and enjoyed watching the games on the TV. He loved being part of the tipping competition at Newmarch, which he won in 2019. Dad also followed the horses and enjoyed an occasional punt. He backed the winner of the 2019 Melbourne Cup, which he was very pleased about. Dad also enjoyed a regular glass of sherry, but first drinks were always had to be had after 5 o'clock. Prior to 2020, Dad enjoyed his time at Newmarch and considered it in his home. The staff were very caring towards him. He enjoyed participating in activities. I remember once Newmarch had ballroom dancing. There was a gentleman and a lady who danced with the residents. The gentleman turned around and said, "Well, I have danced with everyone." I think he meant all the ladies. Dad turned around and said, "Well, you haven't danced with me." And so the two danced together, much to the delight of everyone. Dad's memory never faded. We had listened to many amazing tales of his experiences and adventures over his lifetime. Dad was very proud of each and to reach the age of 94. Dad's many grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and eventually his great-great-grandchildren, were very special to him, and he was looking forward to celebrating his 95th birthday with his family, as he had enjoyed the celebrations of his 90th. He wanted a barbecue. Dad always liked a good barbecue. Dad taught us many things and was an example to us all. His hard work, respectful nature, high standards, and always a gentleman. He taught us the importance of family and looking out for each other. We all love him, miss him, and will always remember the lessons we learned from him. We all truly miss our father. We all never got to say our goodbyes. We were never briefed about his condition or what his prognosis was. Not even all his family could attend the funeral due to the interstate travel and number of attending restrictions. I think we are all still struggling with what happened to Dad, but we want lessons learnt so that others do not have to go through what we've had to go through. I still feel guilty at times because I could not be with Dad when he needed me the most. I would have done anything to see my dad one last time.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Clark.
That completes the family statement, Your Honour.
Thank you. To all the family members who have read out and given statements this morning and who have attended the inquest over the last 3 weeks and are in court today and also listening or observing via the live stream, I want to go back to a few things that I said on day one of the inquest. One of the things which I said on that day was that I hoped that during the inquests they would be conducted in a way which dignified the lives of the people at the centre of the inquest, that the inquests would be conducted in a respectful way to you all as family members and conducted respectfully to appreciate the painful loss that you've all suffered. I hope that we have accomplished that goal over the last 3 weeks. One of the other things which I said on the first day of the inquest was to recognise the unusual and uncommon experience that family members go through as part of a coronial process, as part of an inquest process, in the sense that in an inquest, distressing memories are brought to the forefront. The lives of people at the centre of an inquest are spoken about in a very clinical, sterile way. There is lots of, in many inquests, medical and technical terminology that surrounds discussion of that person's lives. And through all that, that's all occurring in a very public forum, such as a courtroom, and that thankfully most members of our community do not have to go through that process after experiencing the grief and trauma of losing a loved one. So again, I acknowledge the process that you've been through as part of these inquests. One of the unfortunate parts of the process is that inquests are very much focused and concentrated on the last moments of a person's life. Those moments are viewed during an inquest and considered and measured in days, sometimes even hours, minutes, even seconds sometimes. When looking at the last moments of a person's life in that way, that obviously cannot do justice to the person as a whole and what their life has meant, nor take into account, obviously, the years that have usually preceded those last moments. So, firstly, thank you to those of you who have read and given statements today for your generosity in sharing what are obviously very treasured memories, photos, images, and giving those of us in the courtroom who obviously did not know your loved ones and family members what those many years of life were before those final moments. Again, upsettingly, those last moments of a person's life, which an inquest usually examines, are distressing moments, sad moments, and, as I've said, very upsetting moments. And again, they do not do justice to that person as a whole, and it would be unfair, unjust, if the persons at the centre of an inquest were remembered by those last distressing moments. So again, thank you for sharing those memories with us and giving us all a more balanced and accurate picture of your loved ones, your family members. I'm very grateful to all of you who have given statements or had them read out by the council assisting team this morning. As I've said, it's an unusual and uncommon experience that the inquest process almost compels family members to be part of. And in that context, I'm extremely grateful for the generosity that you've shown, the courage that you've shown, the grace that you've all shown in sharing those words and memories with us all today. Thank you very much.
Your Honour, the evidence to be taken by the 19 inquests is now complete.
Yes.
The next phase is for the respective parties to make submissions to Your Honour in respect of that evidence to assist Your Honour to make the appropriate findings that you need to make.
Yes.
What is proposed? Yes, Your Honour.
I might just, before we move on to that phase of the proceedings, just take a short break and then come back and deal with those matters.
Absolutely, of course.
I'll adjourn temporarily and come back at 11:45. Mr. Buchan.
Thank you, Your Honour. As I was indicating just before the break, the next phase of the process is for the parties to put on written submissions in respect of the evidence, the significant body of evidence that is now before Your Honour. Due to the scope of the evidence, this is not a matter where it would be possible or practicable to make submissions by way of oral submissions. At the end of the evidence, the parties will need time to prepare detailed written submissions to assist Your Honour in making the findings that you need to make and to discharge your functions. The timetable that is proposed, and this is a timetable that has been formulated following consultation with our colleagues, is as follows: that the council assisting team put on written submissions by the 14th of October. The families, including representatives of families, put on submissions by the 28th of October. The remaining parties, and that of course includes Anglicare as well as New South Wales Health, put on submissions by the 25th of November. And then the council assisting team put on a reply submission by the 9th of December, if that meets with the court's approval.
Thank you. I'll just check with the legal representatives whether that proposed timetable causes any difficulties. Firstly, Ms. Clark.
No difficulties, Your Honour.
All right, thank you. Mr. Palfrey, any concerns or difficulties with that proposed timetable?
No, thank you, Your Honour.
Thank you. Ms. Furness, any difficulties?
No, thanks, Your Honour.
Ms. Richardson, any concerns?
No, Your Honour.
And Mr. Fordham, any concerns?
No, Your Honour.
All right, thank you. Well, in that case, then, I will confirm that timetable so far as the filing of written submissions is concerned.
Your Honour, can I finally thank the team that has assisted me throughout the inquest, Ms. Martois, Mr. Harris of Council, and the solicitors who have worked assiduously for the Department of Communities and Justice, Mr. Chi, Ms. McKinlay, Ms. Moore and Ms. Heritage. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Having confirmed the timetable for submissions, I would ordinarily adjourn the matter to a date for findings to be delivered. In this case, there will be some lengthy written findings, and on the day the findings are delivered, I would record the formal findings I'm required to make in relation to each of the individual inquests pursuant to Section 81 of the Coroners Act, together with setting out any recommendations made pursuant to Section 82 of the Act. Because there is at the moment some further inquiries that need to be made about the format in which the written findings will take, unfortunately I'm not in a position today to indicate the date for delivery of findings and when those written findings will be available for distribution to the parties, to the family members, and available for publication. I anticipate, given that the submission timetable will conclude in early December, that the findings will be delivered sometime in the first quarter of next year, and I apologise for not being able to be more precise than that. The difficulty arises because of those inquiries that need to be made regarding the ultimate format that the written findings will take. But once those inquiries have been made and a date has been fixed, obviously to suit the availability of the parties concerned, then the parties and the family members will be notified. Could I also begin by thanking all members of the assisting team, counsel and their instructing solicitors throughout the course, for their assistance throughout the course of the inquest. I also thank the legal representatives for the assistance provided also during the inquest. I thank Detective Inspector Peroni and his investigative team for their work conducted in the coronial investigation phase. I also thank the court staff who have assisted throughout the last 3 weeks, and also the technical staff who have addressed the handling of the electronic exhibits and also the management of the live stream of the hearing. Lastly, I also again thank the family members who are in attendance in person today and who are also observing the proceedings remotely via the live stream for remaining engaged throughout the coronial process. As you've heard me say a number of times today and also previously, it is a very unusual process, a very foreign one, a very distressing one, obviously. And so I thank you for your engagement throughout, despite those challenges. I also, again, go back to what I said shortly before the break, that the focus of these inquests, whilst taking into consideration some broader matters, still very much focuses on the lives of the individuals who have who passed away, and what their loss means collectively to you all as family members, both here and also to those family members who can't be here today. And to that extent, again, I pass on my own personal condolences and those condolences on behalf of the Coroners Court of New South Wales to the family members of Ray, Ron, Edith, Maria, Peg, Keith, Leonie, Barry, Shirley, Miss CA, Blanche, David, Victor, Anne, Marco, Olive, Faye, Margaret and Alice. Thank you. I'll now adjourn.